The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. Citizen Mike Show starts now.
So thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Berdinsky, and somewhere on that split screen is the chairman of the Wallingford Town Council, Vinny Cervoni, and also somewhere is Republican Town Councilor Christopher K. Shortell. Guys, thanks for coming on the show. We've got a lot of substantive content to cover, so I want to get right to it. There's going to be, well, we're producing this on a Thursday night. I think Friday, the 12th of June, there's going to be a story in the Record Journal reviewing the Craig Fishbein event. And I think you all know what we're talking about, and everyone who watches the show certainly knows. But I want to set the table a little bit with some basic facts and get to the new developments, which is the statement by the Republican Town Committee, and get your reaction to that statement. But I want to start with something that appeared in the Hartford Courant. And the reason why I'm starting with this, because it made the Hartford Courant. I mean, this is and I think also the New London Day. So the Craig Fishbein incident, we'll call it, is making statewide news. But on June 2, the Courant wrote, State Representative Craig C. Fishbein apologized on Monday for retweeting a racist meme. Fishbein, a Republican from Wallingford and vice chairman of the General Assembly's Conservative Caucus, shared a tweet Saturday with a photo of former Vice President and presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden and the caption, "If you aren't setting fire to buildings, then you ain't black." On the Record Journal followed up with a story, and I'm skipping most of it, but I just want to get to the nub of what I want to talk about. Said Fishbein, whose 90th district includes parts of Wallingford and Cheshire, "I shared the meme without comment in a subtle attempt to point out a double standard rewarding political speech. Without explanation, there was no context. I was wrong." I want to inject an editorial comment, Vinny, before I go to you.
Yep.
By inference, it seems to be saying, Craig Fishbein seems to be saying, if there was explanation, if there was content, he'd be right. That if he just added to his retweet or added some context or an explanation, then retweeting what he retweeted, he'd do it again. So I'm detecting an apology without remorse, and when we go around the horn with you guys, I want to get your reaction to my assessment of that. But the Republican Town Committee issued a statement that reads in part. It says, skipping is by Lawrence Acorus of the Record Journal. In a closed-door meeting Wednesday that lasted nearly 2 hours, the Republican Town Committee voted to endorse Chairman Krista Genova's statement. He's the chairperson of the Republican Town Committee, that he shared on social media Sunday as the official response by the Republican Town Committee. It did not, and the committee did not take any further action. The statement in part said that Fishbein's actions were highly offensive and completely contrary to the committee's values. The statement concluded with a call for Fishbein to strongly consider the damage this action has done to this town and to the faith of his constituents and his ability to represent them. Vinny Cervoni, Republican Town Committee asked Fishbein to strongly consider the damage this action has done to his town. Do you agree that there was damage, and if so, what was the nature of it and how severe was it?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Mike. I think you have to be disconnected from the planet right now to think that there was no damage as a result of that statement. There's been a public outcry. It's not directly related to that. There was a Black Lives Matter protest on North Main Street that stretched several blocks. The issue of sensitivity to race is definitely heightened right now. I will tell you that within minutes of all of this coming to light on June 1st, I got texts from several people out of town who became quickly aware that this had happened and that there was a public outcry. The other place you can go to witness the public outcry is social media. It's all over the place. You do see a few people defending the seemingly unintended innocence of the statement, but those people seem to me to be in the minority.
Yeah, Vinny, your voice just faded out, but we're going to rotate over to Chris and we're going to come back to you. Chris, do you agree with the Republican Town Committee's official statement that there was damage to the town, and what was the nature of it? And do you agree with my assessment that it seemed to be an apology without true remorse?
I agree with what Vinny just said, and yeah, there was damage. I mean, how could there not be damage at this moment in time to do that? There's always damage, but this is a particularly inopportune time. So I agree with that. I agree with the statement. And the damage is that you want somebody who's representing you to not have better judgment than that. As far as the apology, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on that. If you know Craig is a lawyer. No, I'm on with you. No offense to either of you, because you're both lawyers too. But Craig you could say good morning, Craig, and he'll have an argument with you about it. So I think that part of when he says, well, I was trying to illustrate a double standard, whatever he said, I think there is that part of him that is just trying to argue his way out of it. But I don't think, I've talked to him, I've heard his public apologies, I've talked to him privately. He is sorry he did it, and he's not just sorry because he got caught or that it got pointed out. He's legitimately sorry that he did it. So that's my assessment of the situation.
So I pointed to a passage in the Record Journal's coverage of it that Craig Fishbein explained that his failure was to add context, content, and an explanation. That seemed to be what he said, that if he had only done that, he would have retweeted that meme. I mean, that's what he said.
Well, I'm going off what he said at our town council meeting last Tuesday where he was censured. He did not say that at our meeting. So I if he said that in the article, that's what he said in the article. But I'm just going off my own conversations with him privately and what I've heard him say publicly. I was not at the town committee meeting last night, so I can't speak to that.
Finally, and Vinny, short answer, and then to Chris Shortell, the short answer. How do you see the election in Craig's district in November? Too close to call? Craig has won fairly handily each time that he's won, but is this time different? And of course, we have the Trump effect, and I don't know how that cuts. I don't know which way that, how that may cut. Vinny, to you first. Election impact.
So I'm in the camp where I'm really not sure what to predict. And if you had told me this time 4 years ago that Trump was going to be president, I would have said, I kind of doubt it. Going into this election with all of the controversy that has been drummed up as a result of a lot of the Trump statements, you have to wonder if that's going to adversely affect the presidential election. And then you have to wonder about the ripple effect to local elections.
Yeah.
So this is a very sensitive time in modern history. And I think the general public is becoming less and less tolerant of divisive speech.
Chris Shortell, how do you see the election results in Craig's district? Too close to call? Do you think he's got an uphill battle, as the editorial in the Record Journal seemed to suggest?
Yes, I think he's got to work. He went from having no opponent to having an elected official in another town as an opponent. So arguably this is his third, I think. Definitely his toughest opponent on paper by virtue of that. Is there a Trump effect? I mean, I would, in 2016, he was on the same ballot as Trump. That may have helped him. Wallingford voted for Trump, barely voted for Trump. But this time, I agree with what Vinny said. It's none of. I mean, I remember election night being shocked as it was unfolding. So So I think my point is, you said keep it short, which I never do. The Trump effect by itself, I think, would have given him trouble. Now he didn't have an opponent, so I guess it didn't matter. Now he has an opponent, and he has to make up a lot of ground and make up lost confidence. So I think it's not impossible. It's going to be hard.
Okay, let's change the subject. Vinny, I want to go back to an article in the Record Journal, again written by Lawrence Akoris. It's April 25, and it reports that you were interviewed by the Record Journal on their website dealing with the coronavirus response in Wallingford. I don't want to go into the nature, the details of Wallingford's response and how well they're doing and all that. I don't want to get into that. But for some reason, you ended up doing that interview, and I thought the mayor would do that. Walk us through that.
Well, how did I end up here? You called, I asked, you asked, I said yes. Very much the same way.
You mean the Record Journal? The Record Journal didn't call the mayor? Or did the Record Journal call the mayor and the mayor said no? Get a hold of Cervoni.
I don't have personal knowledge of a conversation between the Record Journal and the mayor. I suspect that that's what happened. And like I said, like you, they called and I said yes.
Chris, what's your assessment of all that?
Well,
shouldn't the mayor have done this? Shouldn't the mayor have done this interview?
Let me back up.
Yeah.
I thought it was in the article that it was stated in the article. Now I was going to try and find it. I was hoping Vinny would talk longer so I could try to find it on my phone. I thought in the article itself it said Dickinson declined to be interviewed on camera. That was the caveat. So he would have been interviewed, but he didn't want to do the Facebook Live thing. So I thought that was in the article.
Actually, it says Dickinson declined to be interviewed in a live format.
Okay. So you knew that. You withheld that. You knew that.
No, I didn't.
You withheld that.
Yeah,
I knew you, and I happen to know it. So lucky for me that I knew that because I read the. So
why did he decline in live format? Why did he decline to do it in a live format?
The mayor is. I think that he doesn't. He's not a fan. It's not a secret. He's not a fan of social media. So I think he knew it was Facebook Live. So that's what it was, right? I think it was Facebook Live. So it was. I think he has. I mean, I remember my first term. I think he and I got into an argument, my third meeting about YouTube on camera. Not a bad argument, but a debate about YouTube. So he's not comfortable with social media, which I think plays into it. So I think that I don't know. You have to ask him. I'm just guessing. So
Right.
I should not. Yeah, I'll answer your question. He should have. He's the mayor. I mean, Mike Freda in North Haven was giving fireside chats on Facebook. So I mean, I wish he would have. When he wants to be, the mayor is an excellent communicator, and I think sometimes he just doesn't want to be. So,
Well, I think,
but he did great too. Vinny did great too.
yeah,
So.
I think the bottom line is chief executives around the state, around the country, are addressing their constituents one-on-one on social media, TV, radio, any way they can. But Vinny Cervoni, our mayor, just didn't seem to do that, didn't seem to want to do that. I gather from reports I got, you did a nice job.
Thank you.
You didn't watch it?
No.
You didn't watch it. So you withheld info and you didn't watch. That's shameful. And you call yourself a citizen.
Yeah,
shameful.
Yeah, I didn't watch it.
Okay.
People that needed to watch it watched it, I suppose.
If I could.
Yeah, we're waiting for that.
We all know that the mayor is nothing if he is not consistent. And when in 37 years have you seen the mayor on live video? And until recently, the town council meetings have not been televised live. Until we switched to the GoToMeeting format or the Zoom format, call it what you may. The mayor's only done recorded video.
Okay.
Live action, not interviews.
Let's move on. I want to talk about community pool. We've covered that quite intensively on the show. Just reviewing some of the basic facts. Going back to April 28, the town council voted 6-3 for an appropriations ordinance that would have funded the pool. Some believe there was a lot of money. There was a lot of money. Well, it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money. There's no question about it. The mayor vetoed that vote, and it required 7 votes to overturn the veto, and there were only 5 to do it. So the mayor's veto stuck, and the pool, at least temporarily, has been halted. Vinny Cervoni, you're one of the ones that voted in support of the mayor's veto, to uphold his veto. But I want to know where your heart is going forward. If you were, say, mayor one day, and we didn't have a pool at that time, would you be able to promise that within 4 years we'd have a new community pool?
Well, we're just to be clear, we're not talking about a parallel universe Wallingford that never had a pool, right? We're talking about the Wallingford we live in that does have a pool. I think Wallingford is a community that has had a pool, and Wallingford will have a pool. I just to clarify my vote, it was consistent with my vote on the pool prior to the mayor's action. I didn't vote in favor of the pool when we were going to bond it at the beginning of April, and it's because I'm not comfortable with the timing of incurring the debt. I think people are focused on the challenges we are currently experiencing. I think there's going to be a continuing ripple effect in the economy from this pandemic. And I want to see what happens with that before I commit to $7 million in bonding that results in a significant payback over a significant period of time.
What are some of the benchmarks that you're going to be looking for that would tell you now's the time, we can go ahead?
I'd like to see the results of revaluation. I'm hoping that we retain commercial property values. That's one of my fears. One of my fears is that the pandemic is going to result in a reduction in commercial property values. There are businesses downtown that are not going to reopen after, the pandemic is, the restrictions from the pandemic are completely lifted. And that challenges the value of a commercial building. So if there's a growing vacancy rate that results from the pandemic, there could be a negative impact on the grand list, and the negative impact on the grand list forces you to raise the mill rate unless you substantially cut government.
So what I'm hearing, because I don't want to get sidetracked into grand list and property values, but I know there's an interplay, certainly, and I do know there's an interplay, but what I'm hearing is that the delay in a new pool, because that was my question, a new pool, and for a while, all of the council, not all of the council, but most of the council were supporting a new pool. And what I'm hearing from you is there could be no new pool for a long, long time if some of the economists are right and things don't turn around for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. No new pool within that period of time, yeah?
I'm not comfortable saying that there's going to be no new pool for 6 years. I would certainly hope that it would be shorter than that. So fast forward a year, and I'm at that South Main Street office, and I will tell you, I'm going to be looking, if the project hasn't already started before me, I'm going to be looking to fit that project on the docket for the major capital projects in town.
Okay. Chris Shortell, you were a strong proponent of the pool, as I recall. Is there a timeline that you have in mind where you set a goal for yourself and you say, we've got to have a pool, enough's enough. The economy is the economy, but in 4 years, we're going to have a new pool and we just got to do it. Or could it go on and drag on forever?
No, I don't.
Without a new pool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that I don't set a time. I wouldn't set a timeline. I think that we being people like me and the council who are in favor of the pool, I think need to regroup and look at this delay as a blessing in disguise and reassess a few things. One of them being I know councilors Fishbein and Tata both asked, why can't we rehab the current pool? And we don't have to get into that in the show either. But what if it turns out, well, you could have the current pool for $3 million. You could have the current pool for 20 more years. Is that something the council would consider? I think that's a discussion to be. I think that's info to get and a discussion to be had. Obviously, it's telling that the mayor himself, who I believe wants the pool too. I mean, he wouldn't have let the project go as far as it did if he didn't want it. The mayor felt like we should go with a new pool. So that's a tell, because the mayor of all people is frugal, and if there was a way to rehab he rehabbed the old one 20 years ago. But still, I think that's a discussion. So I think we have to have that discussion in the next 6 months, and hopefully we can get that data. And then I think there's some discussion around the lap lanes, the size. Can we play around with that? So I think, to me, the rest of this year is a discussion. I think it's a great point about the economy. What are the benchmarks? I think that's my only where I not with Vinny, because I think Vinny made sense just now. Where I struggle with the mayor a little bit is for the mayor could be living in the middle of and he was the 1980s boom, and I would imagine all he would talk about is how gloom and doom things were. So I respect the argument that we can't do this because of the timing. I will say that it will never be cheaper to do it than it is now. The cost is only going to, if we do the same pool, the cost is only going to go up. And I think that if you did a cost, let's say we do it in 2 years, I would love to do a cost benefit analysis of, well, what if we done it 2 years ago, and what did we lose money or make money in terms of incurring the debt? Because we really aren't going to incur debt for 2 years. If you look at the bonding, it really wasn't
too far. I don't
we're
want to
getting too far. I know. But those
Cervoni's response to your comments and my comment, which is this, Vinny. Hearing both of you talk, I'm as someone who's in favor of the pool, I'm kind of downcast. This is going to drag on forever. And in a previous show, I said that you'll never see a pool again in Wallingford. That's what I predicted, and I heard both of you talk, and I'm still holding to that. But you've got the final word.
I think you get pessimistic way too easily.
I've been following Wallingford government for a long time. That's how that happens. Yeah.
You've been following Wallingford government with dissatisfaction for a long time. I think you need to give these two guys a chance to figure out how to get it done, to get it back on the docket, to get it to happen at a time when there's confidence in the town's ability to incur debt. And I mean, there's a whole nother debt discussion you and I had it one of the last times I was on the show when we got these education projects, right. Talking about as much as $120 million. That's all bonding.
Yeah.
That's
big nuts. Yep. Let's change the subject. And because you mentioned bonding, and that's a segue into the next topic that I want to cover. And this is the episode where Craig Fishbein and the mayor kind of went at it over the issue of bonding. But just to sort of set the table for this, bonding is borrowing money, basically. The town doesn't take out mortgages or get bank loans. They borrow money by issuing bonds. You could think Wall Street when I say that. So investors buy these bonds, and the money, the cash, goes to Wallingford. Wallingford spends that proceeds of the bond on the projects that they have in mind. And Wallingford has to pay back principal and interest, just sort of like you do on your mortgage. That's basically what bonding is. But there was a spirited discussion between Craig and the mayor at the last meeting over bonding. Vinny, can you sort of untangle what each side was getting at, what their points were?
Forgive me if I oversimplify. I have a tendency to do that. But Craig's point was, why do we go through this bond exercise when we don't go ahead and borrow the money? We end up paying cash for the project. We've made an allocation in the cap and non-recurring fund. Why do we go through this bond exercise? And the mayor's position is, we do it this way to make sure that the project is going to happen. And I don't think either side said it as succinctly as that, and you may not agree with me that that's what either side was saying, but who's this Craig Fishbein guy we keep talking about?
Skipping over to Chris. Chris, what's your view? What happened during that discussion? And then it'll circle back to me.
I think what Vinny said is what happened. Exactly that. Craig asked, why do we do this every year? The mayor, the mayor's response was, the mayor kind of got fired up and basically said, if we don't do this, the projects don't get done, which is a little bit, he didn't quite say it the way Vinny said it. I think that the nuance there is, this is like getting a home equity loan, but never using it. It's like, that's how I've viewed it, is you get a home equity loan, you have the money, just in case something else happens, microburst comes through and tears up a bunch of streets you didn't expect, and you have to pay money, you have the home equity loan. My issue with the whole exchange, I have two issues. One, I have an issue with Craig, because Craig asks this it's like Groundhog Day. Every budget meeting that I've been involved with, I believe this is my 5th budget, Craig has brought this up. So Craig knows exactly what's going to happen when he brings this up. So, I mean, to me, it's not like it's a fresh question. From the mayor's perspective, it's not that the projects won't happen. It's that what the mayor meant was, I won't do them if you don't give me this bond authorization, is what kind of how I interpreted what he was saying. I won't do them, which was almost a threat. And while I sympathized with the mayor that Craig brought this up yet again, you're really not going to do them because you're mad at Craig. I mean, so that was kind of my takeaway. And of course it went nowhere and we passed it. So.
Yeah, I would say that not everyone watching from the outside, and a lot of these meetings are for the benefit of the public, a lot of the political speeches are for the benefit of the public, not everyone from the outside has heard the prior question and answer over past years. And if it was a valid point, let's say 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and last year, if it's a valid point, it's still a valid point this year. And just because the mayor kind of shouts you down doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't raise it again. But I want to get back to sort of the reason, purpose, and method of bonding. The facts are, as both of you stated, we have these projects in the capital non-recurring fund. We bond them every year, and we authorize bonding, we authorize bonding every year, but we never sell the bonds. I don't know how much we pay the bonding attorney to show up at those meetings, Attorney Fozzie. But at some point you can say, we're really going through a useless exercise here to pass this bonding authorization when there's never a serious intent to bond. And I think that's a fair point to raise every time the bonding authorization is raised. And for the mayor to tell an unsuspecting member of the public who may be viewing this discussion for the very first time, if you don't authorize bonding, we can't do the project, is a misstatement, because a counselor could say, I am voting for the project. I'm voting to fund those projects in the capital non-recurring fund. I am in favor of the projects. We can certainly go through with those projects without a bonding authorization like we have for the past 15 years. But I don't feel like paying Attorney Fozzie year after year, and I don't necessarily feel like paying the principal and interest. So the decision to vote in favor of the project is severable and distinct from the bonding authorization. Vinny Cervoni, your reaction to my comments. We'll go to Chris and then move on.
I'm not going to react to your comments. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
So the real issue there is that it adds security to the ability to accomplish the project. If you've been following this, you know, for the same decade that I've been following this, I think this is budget number 11 for me. You know, the points that's been made over the years that wasn't clearly made this year is that this gives security to see that the project gets done in case that there is a reallocation of the cap and non-recurring fund, kind of like what happened Tuesday night with the budget. So, you know, if there's a year when we really do need to bond to support those projects, this was one for the reason that I think we're going to talk about in the near future. And if I could take a few seconds, you know, for some reason, this budget season has felt a little more grueling than any of the others I've been on. And I think a component of it is this two-dimensional experience we're having. I think it changes the way we communicate to each other. And there are certain people who flourish under it. There are certain people who embellish under it. And there are certain people who resent it. And I think that had some coloration on all of the discussions that happened on Tuesday night.
Chris, you got the final word on this topic, if you want it. I'm not sure
I
Vinny
always-
Cervoni was going to join us on that one.
I always want the final word, and I rarely get it. I agree with I agree with Vinny 100% on the nature of the meetings and how they I think they've changed the dialogue and the interplay and maybe people's how we interact. I don't have an issue with the mayor having flexibility to do this. How much do we pay Attorney Fozzie? Who cares? I don't think that is a hill to die on for me. But
So I'm going to take the final word. I would have voted for the bonding ordinance when I was on the council. I always did, and I would have this time too. What I object to is the statement that if you don't approve the bond, you're not approving the project, and because that is clearly false, it offended me. He didn't have to say that. He could have explained it a lot differently, and someone watching the meeting for the first time may think that bonding and the projects are inextricably linked by law or something. They're inextricably linked by the mayor's personal preference and policy, but certainly they're not connected, by rule, ordinance, or statute. You can have a bonding authorization or not, and the project or not, and they're independent decisions. Okay, let's change the subject to the budget. I'm going to try to explain what I think happened as quickly as I can, and then Vinny, I'm going to go to you and ask you if I've missed anything material, and then your assessment of what the result was. But this year, there was a strong interest on the council, obviously, in trying to freeze the mill rate. And in order to freeze the mill rate, the council had to come up with, I'm rounding numbers and always will in these discussions, about 1.3 million in either new revenues or reduced budgetary expenditures or a combination of both. You had to cover a gap of 1.3 million. And this year, with Christopher K. Shortell sort of assuming the burden of work here, the council found a way that was comprised of two phases. One was to reduce budgetary expenses by rounded numbers, $500,000. And so you've got 500,000 of the 1.3 million. And the other component was to take money that is sent over, actually money that the town council gets from the electric division through its budgetary powers, to use electric division money to cover general government operating expenses in the amount of $800,000. So you put the two together, it covers the 1.3 million. A consequence of that is that the capital non-recurring fund is used to getting all the money that the electric division sends over, which is generally speaking about 1.8 million. And this year, the poor capital non-recurring fund didn't get all that. It only got $1 million because the town council held on to 800,000, kept it in the general fund to reduce taxes to cover general expenditures. So to make the kappa non-account whole, the council found old money that was sitting around and unallocated in the kappa non-recurring account. It's reported to be 1.2 million, used 800,000 of that to add to this year's kappa non-recurring budget, and everyone is happy. I'm done. Vinny Cervoni, add what I missed and then give us your assessment as to the result.
I think your round numbers and your summary effectively captured what happened. Some of the finer details are that if you're talking about 1.3 and there's 800 from the pilot that got diverted, and then there's 500 general government reductions, of that 500, only 100 is reduced in the Board of Ed budget. And if you do the math on the equities of the budget in town, the Board of Ed budget is 2/3 of the town budget. Plus or minus, it's 60-something percent, somewhere in the low 60-something percent range. And I think that if you are going to achieve tax savings, the better way to do it is to reduce spending. And if you're going to reduce spending and do it equitably, you take 1/3 out of general government and you take 2/3 away from education. And I would have supported something that did that and didn't necessarily have to cancel the increase in the mill rate. The fact of the matter is that this budget included 16 new positions in the fire department. This budget includes raises for all the bargaining units. So how do you do that without some marginal increase in taxes to affect it? And the mayor went beyond what he's typically done in reallocating the general fund reserve and boosted that up to $7.4 million in his budget. I didn't like using $800,000 of the pilot money to offset taxes, for two reasons. First of all, we're fortunate that we get ratepayer money, and it's important to distinguish that. That's ratepayer money that's paid to the town in lieu of taxes. It includes the ratepayers in Northford and the ratepayers from the bordering towns. There's a few ratepayers in Cheshire, a few in Meriden, a few in Durham, not a significant number at all, but it includes all that money that comes into town. It's shifted over, and I think it's wise to use it to continue to have money for capital projects, for roads and building improvements and that sort of stuff. It's important to have that money. So when you take the pilot and you use it to offset the tax increase, you've used more and different non-tax revenue to defer the increase on recurring expenses. If you don't do that again next year, and we're going to have somewhere, between 1.5% and 2% wage increases. If nothing else in town goes up, the wages always do. You've got to fund the increase somehow. So now you're either dipping back into the pilot to make up that $800,000, or you're increasing taxes next year that you didn't increase this year to make up that $800,000. So those were my issues with the budget. And just those issues aside, and I've told Chris this offline, and I'll say it again, he worked very hard. He came up with, I think that was the third different proposal he came up with to try and achieve the zero that everybody else was talking about. And I think his work was commendable, and he should be credited for it.
Chris, part of what I'm hearing from Vinny Cervoni, this is not all of his comments, part of them seem to be, you can, by avoiding a tax increase this year, you can sort of pay me now or pay me later, but eventually you're going to pay. I guess one would say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll pay you later. I won't pay you now. but you were you put this together. So what do you say to Vinny Cervoni's comments?
This thing was like Frankenstein's monster, and it was evolving literally an hour before the meeting, between discussions among Republican counselors. I was talking to Jim Bowes on the phone. I was talking to Janice Small on the phone. I mean, it was. I sent it out. Just a quick story for the Citizen Like viewers. I sent out the final Word document to the other Republicans at like 6:05 Tuesday, and my subject line was, "I'm never doing this again," because it was like this. It was just this. You got to the point, the final day, whatever. It was a lot, I don't think I certainly understand the concerns. Let me hit some quick points. Board of Ed equity. It is true the Board of Ed's 2/3 of the budget. However, two things with the Board of Ed. I did an analysis of the Board of Ed's surplus. The Board of Ed averages about a $500,000 surplus every year. This year is going to be more because of the COVID. They weren't the transportation contract. But in general, in a normal year, the Board of Ed averages between 500,000 and 600,000. If you line up all the average surpluses of every town department, and you compare the size of their surplus, their size of their unspent money to their total budget, do you know, and then you sort it in Excel, it's very easy, which of these departments has the tightest budget? It's the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed surplus, and yes, it's a big number every year, and that's what I think sways people, or sways me, even I've said it on the show. But when you look at it that way, they have the tightest budget of any department, more than any department in town government. The other thing I would say with the Board of Ed, in the last decade, we've had the last, I think, 2 years, we have not run a surplus. But before that, we had several years with a surplus, 2.6 million, in that range. Do you know what percent of that surplus was from the Board of Ed? It was 1/3. In the years when town government, when Wallingford ran a surplus, it was the Board of Ed only was responsible for 1/3 of that. Not so. I would argue a little bit against the equity argument about we have to cut them in proportion to the budget, because if you look at it in those other two ways, they actually budget very well. I think that also, if no other variables change, yes, we'll have to make up this money. Minnie's right. This money's going to have, this 800,000 will have to be made up if no other variables change. But I do think that the way these budgets are built, there are variables in there. There is wiggle room in there. We know that the town is funded at 100% staffing, but we know that an employer of the town size never has 100% staffing. So that's always kind of a built-in wiggle room. And so we fund salaries at 100%, even though we're not paying them out at 100%. Expenses are overestimated, revenues are underestimated. So there is a corridor and there's margin in there. There also are one-time expenses in this budget. Dump trucks, we don't buy dump trucks every year. There's debt service coming off the debt service. So I think every budget's different. And so so it may very well be next year, we may have to make up all of it. We may have to make up 400,000 of it. I don't know. But I guess my last point is that we tried purposely to avoid going to the general fund and make some of that, I don't know what to call it, that dead money in cap and non, put it to work, because it wasn't being put to work. It's extra money that's been sitting there for years. We had to ask to get, no one told us voluntarily, there's $1.2 million free and clear. We asked. And so I think that you could make an argument the stuff where the 800,000 is going toward a lot of big purchases, in the budget, that will not recur. But we'll see. I understand the other side.
So I want to add a little bit of context, and then we'll go around the horn next to you, Vinny. Just the way the budget works, the Wallingford Town Council and the mayor, working together, have the authority through their budget making powers to take any amount of money they want from the electric division. The electric division is a division of the town of Wallingford. The council and the mayor have budget making authority, so the town council and the mayor are not limited to any dollar amount that they can take from the electric division. By tradition, the town council and the mayor take from the electric division money that's set forth in a formula in an ordinance. But that formula doesn't put a minimum or maximum limit that the town can take from the electric division. What's new this year, and which I think is the big headline and the big takeaway, is that for the very first time, maybe in history, but at least as far as I can recall, electric division money has been used by the council to offset general government expenses. Is that good or is that bad? It depends upon your perception. But it is a big move. It opens the door, though, to the possibility that in future years, additional electric division money could be used to offset taxes. And this, if it, so maybe that's a positive. I could see someone arguing that it's a negative, that it's a bad precedent, and it leads the way to financial irresponsibility. I'll leave it to Vinny and to mop up that thought. But it's a very big move that shouldn't go unnoticed. Another consequence of that is that by the council doing what they did, they starved somewhat the cap and non-recurring fund, which needed to be starved because there is old money, loose money, just collecting dust in there. And if this is a way of squeezing out $800,000 from the dark and dusty corners of the capital non-recurring fund, that's a positive. The capital non-recurring fund is certainly not hurting for money. And by the way, if they run short, they can always bond. I don't want to rehash that again. But so these are two big takeaways and not necessarily all bad. Vinny Cervoni, if you're so inclined, your reaction to my comments.
Wow. Because you said a lot of things about one thing. And I mean, I guess it goes to the complexity of the fact that there is this cap and non-recurring fund. It's there for capital and one-time projects. It is money well saved and well used. We found out there's $1.2 million there that isn't currently allocated to a project, but the fact of the matter is that it's sitting there to be used for future capital projects, and we will have those. It might have been nice that if we started the pool next year, if there was an additional $1.2 million of capital money to go and put towards the pool and reduce the need to bond for it. It's been a policy that has worked well for budgeting. If you compare us to the surrounding towns, I think our taxes are historically more reasonable. I think we do well with money. That program that directed the pilot money towards capital projects is a good program. And your point that it could create a dependency is a real concern, because then you do force dependency on bonding. And that's one of the things that we do well. We typically maintain a per capita bonded allocation below $1,000. So say there's 45,000 residents in Wallingford. We're typically running less than $45 million in bonds, and I think that's a healthy way to run the town. You're not spending money on interest that you don't necessarily have to spend, and it's a good way to keep the roads healthy. Just by one thing we do with the cap and non-recurring budget.
Chris, we're going to skip you on this round because I got to begin to triage our time, but I want to stay with the capital non-recurring issue. Vinny, I want to lay out some facts, and then the question I'm going to ask you, this will give you time to sort of go over in your mind, but I'm going to lay out some facts and then ask you whether or not, in view of this, you see any reforms to the cap and non process that would be desirable. That's going to be my ultimate question to you. But we know from the documents that the town produces that, and statements made at budget workshops hearing, there is $1.2 million in the capital non-recurring account that no one knew any about, at least no one on the council knew about. It's not reported on any monthly report, on any annual report, on any official document. It is not reported or recorded anywhere. You'd have to know enough to ask the question to find out, hey, there's 1.2 million. And how long that money has been in there is somewhat in question, but it's been in there a long, long, long long, I'm going to add 6 long time. It's been a long time that money's been sitting in there, which is not the way, in my view, to run a government. If you're dealing with other people's money, you either run a tight ship or don't run any ship. And I don't see this being as run as a tight ship. Now, let me just refer to some numbers. We know that money for the Wallace Avenue construction project, $40,000, has been sitting there since 2010. There's another project that's been sitting around since 2012, which is $80,000. A small amount left over from the Wooding Kaplan parking lot. And I'm just going to stop on the first page, but the last one I want to draw your attention to is that $165,000 has been sitting in the capital non-recurring account since 2014. Not a penny of it has been spent. Not a penny of it has been spent that should have lapsed as a matter of charter. As a matter of charter, that money should have been lapsed, but it's not, it hasn't been lapsed. And that's why I say, if you're not going to run a tight ship, then don't run any ship. And to have all this old money kind of stockpiled up, in addition to the 1.2 and just the cherry on the cake, it was also highlighted at a budget workshop, that there was an additional $500,000 in leftover paving money from 2016? From 2016, which you can add to the 1.2. So there's really, 1.7, and this almost came out by accident. I think one of the speakers at the table said, "Thank you, Chris Chartel, for bringing that money to my attention." Are you serious? Are you serious? This is the ship that we run? So my question, Vinny Cervoni, any reforms, if you could make the reforms with a stroke of your pen, if you were mayor, any changes would you make, or do you like everything you see?
Well, I think it probably, we have an annual opportunity as the council to look at what's going on with the cap and non-recurring fund. We're not regularly seeing reports. The charter does mandate that we see quarterly budget reports. We actually see monthly. And perhaps it's reasonable for us to ask for at least quarterly to have an understanding what's going on with the cap and non-recurring fund. You talk about $1.7 million sitting there. When you think about the fact that that is about 1% of the current annual budget, I think that puts that in perspective. I don't think it's a horrible thing to have $1.7 million in the bank. I presume it's getting some rate of interest on it. Money doesn't get old. And it's money that eventually will be spent on capital projects. That's what it's there for. And while it might not be currently allocated, that's what it will eventually be used for.
Chris, your thoughts on my thoughts and Vinny Cervoni's, and then we're going to begin to wrap up the show.
Well, I appreciate what Vinny said about, putting that 1.7, the percentage in perspective, because I would argue, yeah, I agreed. And meanwhile, the 800,000 that everyone's wringing their hands over for the budget is 0.0047%. So maybe we didn't blow up the budget either, because that's a very small number. I think that we actually do get reports on cap and non in the monthly report. I don't think it's in every month as we've looked back, but it typically, those 100-page reports we get every month, that's cap and non. So we do get reports, and I never looked into it much before this year. I think there was one other year I may have looked at it, but not as closely. So that's on me, and that's on us as a council. In terms of reforms, yeah, I think we need to get a line item in the report that says this much money is free and clear, so that we don't have to ask. And I think, it's too bad. Again, I go back to, the mayor, when he wants to be, is an excellent communicator. This is my 6th year on the council. There's never been a vision communicated to the council about the cap and non. I mean, there's that page in the budget book which has the 6 years, but that's it. There's never been a vision saying, and I understand that there's a fear of when you put something out there and it doesn't happen, but I know, being on the Board of Ed for 2 years, Sal Menzo gave a very good vision with strategic plans, and sure, not everything came to fruition, but I think that if there was a vision, this budget would not have happened the way it did. If the mayor put out a vision for the cap and non and said, "This is what I'm looking at, this is what I'm thinking," there is no way the budget plan that got approved by 7 counselors would have gotten approved by 7 counselors. So I think that just proves the merit, the value in rhetoric and the value in communicating. So that's my closing thought.
And Vinny Cervoni, you have the closing 60 seconds if you want it, because we're running out of time. Any response to what I said or what Chris Hartel said? No requirements. Yes, so I want to make sure you get a fair shake on these.
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of philosophy that's being discussed here. And I don't think anybody's, you know, in the course of this budget discussion, I heard more than once a counselor accuse the administration or the comptroller of doing something illegal. And that's not at all what we're talking about here. We're talking about a difference in philosophy, in what one administrator thinks that good government is versus the 9 other philosophies that sit opposite him on his legislative branch. So I think that's probably a positive takeaway from this discussion.
Let's make that the final word. I appreciate that. And Vinny, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike show. A spoiler alert, I guess you'd call it. I personally am expecting a veto. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not asking you guys to take a guess at it. But I'm expecting a veto, in which case there'll be a vote on whether or not there's 7 counselors that join together to override. Vinny, you're shaking your head. Talk to me about that. Is
I
wrong?
Yeah, I think if it was going to happen, it would have already happened.
No
You know,
veto.
Yeah, I think the mayor likes to get the tax bills out on time. And a veto, waiting to the 10th day to veto the budget, puts that in jeopardy. So there were 7 votes on the council's amended budget. So I think if he was going to veto the budget, it would have been done by today.
So this is breaking news here, and I just want to, there's not going to be a veto.
I don't think so.
Okay. So again, Vinny, thanks for coming on the show, and thank you viewers for watching. We throw this up on YouTube in a couple of days. So maybe on the 13th of June, you might see it on YouTube. You know, search the Citizen Mike Wallingford channel. It's up on social media, the links to it. And also WPAA is going to be airing the show at 9 at night on most weekdays. Thanks again, Vinny Cervoni. Good night, everybody.